2016, Season 1, Episode number 12. If you tuned in last week, you heard us talking about John F. Kennedy's murder in Dallas. So tonight, we're going to be doing the second part of the show. We will be discussing Lee Harvey Oswald, the supposed killer of John F. Kennedy. A lot of people have simply assumed that because the Warren Commission came out and said that Lee Harvey Oswald did it, that meant he was guilty, despite the glaring pile of evidence to the contrary. Lee Harvey Oswald, born October 18, 1939 in New Orleans. He was murdered on live TV in Dallas, November 24, 1963, at the age of 24 years old. Not very old for such a impact on the society. Oswald was the youngest of three brothers. His dad died just 2 months prior to his birth. As a teenager in 1955, Oswald attended the Civil Air Patrol meetings that were held there near New Orleans. The pilot in charge of these meetings was David Ferrie. If you saw the movie JFK, David Ferrie was played by Joe Pesci. And knowing what I know about the character, I would say that Joe did a remarkably good job of portraying the man. He was somewhat excitable. He also had this unusual condition where all of his hair had fallen out. And so as a means of not being bald without eyebrows, he painted on his eyebrows and he glued hair to the top of his head, trying to look normal. That was his idea of normal. Anyway, Oswald enlisted in the United States Marine Corps on October 24th, 1956, just after his 17th birthday. Because he was underage at the time, he had to get his brother Robert to sign for him, saying that he was his guardian. So Oswald went into the Marine Corps. May 1957, he was granted a clearance to handle classified material, up to and including confidential, which is one step below secret. It's not a very high rating if you look into the different security levels. While in the Marine Corps, Oswald decided to teach himself how to speak Russian. Although this was an odd thing to do, but he persevered. He worked at it, tried to become fluent in Russian. And finally, in 1959, the Marine Corps allowed him to take a proficiency test. It was written and oral. He scored very poorly in the overall test, which is odd, because a native of Russia named Mohrenschildt later testified to the Warren Commission that Oswald had a remarkable fluency in Russian. Mohrenschildt was also a CIA operative who may have been highly instrumental in getting Oswald his job working at the Texas School Book Depository. Marina Oswald, Lee Harvey's wife, said she thought Oswald was a native Russian based on his proficiency in the language. Now, her living her entire life in Russia and speaking almost nothing but Russian at the time, if she was fooled by Oswald's ability to speak Russian, how did he get so good in just 2 years, being supposedly self-taught? October 31st, 1959, Oswald, after moving into Russia, he was visiting Russia at the time, he went to the United States Embassy in Moscow, where he declared his desire to renounce his U.S. citizenship. He was making it official. He was defecting to Russia. Russia didn't really want him at the time. They didn't think he had anything to offer them, but he pitched a big enough mess that they decided to allow him to stay. Oswald's original intention was he wanted to attend school at the Moscow State University. However, they sent him to Minsk instead to work on a factory making radio, television, and military electronics. Since he was a radar technician in the Marine Corps. They figured electronics would be right up his alley. Some odd reason, Oswald received a government-subsidized, fully furnished studio apartment in a prestigious building. Considering he was a newcomer to Russia, relatively unwanted by most of the upper government, why did they give him such a fancy place to live? For a person going to work in a factory every day, the Russian government was treating him quite well. They did keep him under surveillance constantly. The KGB followed him around, kept tabs on everything he was doing, but still they seemed to be treating him quite well. The U-2 spy planes, which were developed in secret to fly over Russia and keep tabs on what was going on over there, they were supposed to prove that the Soviets were stockpiling massive bombers and missile bases throughout the country. That was their intention. They were going to fly over Russia, take photographs of all of these secret military bases all throughout the country, and then report back to the president and show him where all of these secret bases were hidden. However, the U-2 spy planes flying over Russia couldn't find these massive government installations that they thought would be out there. Russia had far fewer weapons than the CIA wanted to admit at the time. But then, in 1960, Francis Gary Powers, a former captain in the Air Force, he had to resign from the Air Force in order to fly the U-2 spy planes, was shot down by Soviet missile while attempting to cross Russia in a U-2 spy plane. Now, Oswald had worked on radar following the U-2 planes. Powers' plane was not destroyed as it was supposed to, and he didn't take the magic pill that he was supposed to swallow in the event that he did get shot down, so the Russian military couldn't capture him. Powers was captured by the Soviet military. Now, President Eisenhower was just about to meet with Premier Khrushchev. They were going to discuss the possibility of curbing the massive buildup of weapons that the two countries were currently doing. The idea was, you're not doing anything we don't like, and we're not doing anything you won't like. Let's call it quits and we'll make World War II finally end. However, since Gary Powers had just been shot down, this was tremendously embarrassing to the United States president, and it really didn't make Premier Khrushchev very happy. So, the military-industrial complex went into high gear, and suddenly Russia started developing all of the bombers and the missile bases that the U-2 spy planes were originally supposed to have found. Could Oswald have passed on vital information allowing the Russians to shoot down the super-secret spy plane? His highest clearance had only been confidential. I seriously doubt he had access to any information that the Russians didn't already have. He probably told them what he knew, but I don't think they got much use out of it. After living in Russia for a few years, Oswald suddenly decided he didn't much care for the country. Don't know what it was that attracted him to the place in the first place. Whatever it was, he didn't find it. He decided he wanted to come back to the United States. So he went back to the embassy and he applied to reestablish his American citizenship. Now, at that time, there was only one man in the entire planet who could allow Oswald to come back into the country. Who was that one man? That would be Bobby Kennedy, JFK's younger brother. Let's stop here and take a brief pause so we can play some commercials and catch our breaths. We'll be right back. You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. You're looking for a great cup of coffee? Stop on by the Organic Man Coffee Shop, 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7. Not into coffee? They also have other drinks. Hot chocolate, hot tea. Stop on by next time you're in the neighborhood and check them out. Plenty of parking out front these days. The Organic Man Coffee Shop, 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arcanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros escuchando Arcanasa Radio.
You're listening to Arcanasa Radio. So Oswald is allowed to come back to the United States, and guess who paid for it? The government. Seems kind of odd that the government would be paying to get a man back from Russia who had pretty much told the United States he didn't want anything to do with him. So in October, Oswald, there he was hired by a graphic arts firm known as Jaggers, Childs, and Stovall as a photo print trainee. Now, the unusual thing about this company is they worked on classified maps for the U.S. military. Why would a company that did classified map making for the military allow a deserter, a man who had left the United States for another country, why would they hire him to work in their facility? Later on, Oswald did tell a friend that the CIA was supposed to have helped him get this job. By April of '63, Oswald had moved back to New Orleans. May 26th, Oswald wrote to the headquarters of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, a pro-Castro organization, telling them he wanted to rent an office and form an FPCC group in New Orleans. The FPCC told Oswald he shouldn't open the office. They appreciated his efforts and all, but he was kind of doing a whole lot in a very short period of time. Well, Oswald went ahead and opened an office anyway, and he told them that he had done such. Now, the unusual thing about his office, he rented a space in 544 Camp Street. Located in the same building, around the corner, was 531 Lafayette Street, which in 1963 had the office of Guy Bannister, a private detective agency. In his memoirs, Jim Garrison stated flatly that 544 Camp Street was the entrance to Bannister's office. He writes that both entrances, 544 Camp and 531 Lafayette, led to the same place. Now, Guy Bannister had spent 20 years of his life with the FBI, 16 of them as a special agent in charge. After leaving the Bureau, he moved to New Orleans, where he became active in local politics and community affairs. A notorious right-winger, anti-communist, and white supremacist, he would have made an unlikely pal for Lee Harvey Oswald. But to Garrison, the address on Oswald's leaflets could mean nothing else. Jim Garrison is the only person to ever attempt to try anyone for the death of John F. Kennedy. Check out his book, On the Trail of the Assassins. Notice it's plural. Assassins. Available at Amazon.com. In the movie JFK, Jim Garrison was the main character played by Kevin Costner. While in New Orleans, Oswald was seen in the company of Jack Ruby and David Ferry. This is the same David Ferry who was in the Civil Air Patrol with him when he originally lived in New Orleans. This is the same David Ferry who was also a CIA pilot. Now, Judith Very Baker claims she was very well acquainted with Lee Oswald while in New Orleans. She says that they worked together in a secret lab creating a weaponized cancer virus. Her book, Me and Lee, is worth checking out. She tells how she was connected to this lab where the murder of Dr. Mary Sherman took place. Why weaponize cancer? Well, the CIA wanted Castro dead. One plan that the CIA had come up with was to have snipers stationed on rooftops along a parade route where Castro, traveling in an open-top vehicle, would have been an easy target. They also had a plan they were going to poison his cigars. They had a plan they were going to give him various diseases that they could try and get to him. The plans to kill Castro had started when Eisenhower was in power and Richard Nixon was the vice president. Nixon had been given the job of getting rid of Castro, and he got the CIA involved, and the CIA got the mafia involved. And with all the trying and all the efforts that they put into it, from what I understand, Fidel Castro is still alive today. Judith Baker says Oswald was trying to get into Cuba to deliver the cancer weapon to Cuban dissidents. Oswald was reportedly trying to get a visa to Cuba while in Mexico City. Well, the CIA had the Cuban consulate under 24-hour observation. And there is a film shot of a man who claimed to be Oswald going and coming from the Cuban embassy. The man in the film looks nothing like Lee Harvey Oswald. If it wasn't Oswald, then who was it? In an article by John Armstrong, the following information is found. According to the Warren Commission, Lee Harvey Oswald left his job during the morning of March 12, 1962. He walked 11 blocks to a downtown post office, purchased a postal money order, then walked to a different post office several miles to the west, where he chose to mail his order in to Klein Sporting Goods in Chicago before returning to work. The letter was postmarked 10:30 a.m. However, the company time records show that Oswald never left his job. He worked continuously from 8 a.m. till 12:15 p.m. on 9 different print jobs. Why order a rifle through the mail? He's living in Dallas. It would be a simple thing to walk into any sporting goods store, or even the Sears store for that matter, and buy one off the shelf. He didn't have to use mail order. Could it be that someone wanted him to have a paper trail pointing to the fact that he bought a particular rifle from a particular company with intentions of using it for a particular target? It's what you'd call a paper trail. Who would want such a paper trail? Certainly not an actual murderer. Okay, so maybe he fudged his timesheets. Maybe he got someone to cover for him. Hey, I'm going out to buy a rifle to shoot Kennedy. Keep an eye out for the boss for me. Sounds a little too strange. The letter to have reached Chicago the following day, it would have to have been picked up by a mail carrier sometime around 10:30. Delivered to the Industrial Station Post Office in Zone 7, sorted, bagged, put into an airmail pouch. The airmail pouch would have to have been delivered to another mail carrier to Love Field and then placed aboard an aircraft prior to 12 noon departure time. Some of y'all are not familiar with the old airmail service. If you mailed a normal letter, it would go by ground. They would put it in the back of a truck. The truck would drive to the destination. Then someone would actually hand deliver the letter to the recipient. Now, airmail cost more. It came in an envelope with red hash marks all around the edge of the envelope. and it cost about twice as much to mail the thing. And these things received priority handling. They went by air. Now, since they cost a lot more, most people didn't send airmail unless they absolutely had to. Now, Oswald was not known for spending money he didn't have. So why would he go to the effort of sending an airmail purchase to Chicago to buy a rifle he could easily just pick up off the shelf at a local store? Now, the money order was allegedly received by the Klein Sporting Goods in Chicago the following morning. It was included with about 1,000 other mail orders from around the country, and then deposited into Klein's bank account. If this sounds a little far-fetched, it gets more far-fetched as we go. After the murder of Kennedy, the FBI contacted the owner of Crescent Firearms, Louis Fieldscott, in New York. This was the only company that was bringing in that particular kind of Italian rifle at the time. They asked him if his company had records concerning the importation and the sale of a Mannlicher Carcano rifle, the one supposedly found on the 6th floor of the schoolbook depository. Fieldscott searched his records and found that the Mannlicher Carcano rifle's serial number, C2766, had been sold to Klein Sporting Goods in Chicago, June 18, 1962. Fieldscott turned his original records over to the FBI, and those records disappeared. No one knows where they went. He allegedly told the FBI agent that the rifle was a 36-inch long weapon. But without the original records, the model number and length of the rifle sold June 18, 1962 are unknown. There was no description of the rifle, just that it was a Mannlicher Carcano C2766, given by Fieldscott in his affidavit, and the UFO withheld all information relating to this rifle. The FBI never produced a single document that showed the date C2766 was delivered to Klein, nor the identity and address of the person who purchased that rifle from Klein's. All original records from Crescent Arms and from the Klein's microfilm disappeared while in FBI custody. Only photographs of documents were given to the Warren Commission and are now in National Archives. Where did all the original paperwork go, and why can't anyone find it? The FBI soon announced that Lee Harvey Oswald had purchased a mail-order rifle from Klein Sporting Goods for $12.78. That was used to assassinate President Kennedy. How did the FBI determine the price of the rifle? Did the Klein's microfilm show that the rifle 2766 that Crescent sold June 18, 1962, how much it cost? And were they sure it was the same rifle that was resold for $12.78 to an individual the FBI refused to identify? When postal money orders were manufactured at the printing office in 1963, 12 small rectangular holes were punched in the cardstock used to make postal money orders. Anyone familiar with the old punch cards will understand this. Those punched holes identified the serial number printed on the front of each postal money order. These holes made it possible for large volumes of postal money orders to be electronically sorted and arranged in a systematic way after being returned to the U.S. Postal Repository from the bank system. The FBI records show that November 23rd, at 7:55, Secret Service agent Grims was told that a $21.45 money order had been located in Washington, D.C. by Robert Jackson, an employee of the National Archives. This is kind of odd, since the post office wouldn't have sent their deposited money orders to the National Archives. They would have put it in their own offices. This particular $21.45 money order was never cashed, never deposited, never routed through the Federal Reserve banking system. This unpaid money order was most likely taken from a stack of new money orders in 11 that's November 23rd, 1963, at the Dallas Post Office by U.S. Postal Inspector Harry Holmes, a longtime FBI informant identified by the Bureau as Dallas T2. Holmes could have date-stamped the money order, March 12, 1962, and it was then sent directly to FBI headquarters. The serial number on the money order indicates that it was pulled from a stack of new money orders at the Dallas Post Office in late 1963. U.S. postal money orders are normally deposited or cashed at a bank or financial institute. They are date-stamped, endorsed by the bank, routed through the Federal Reserve Bank, where they are endorsed and date-stamped a second time, and then sent to a postal money order center in either Kansas City or Arlington, Virginia, where they are endorsed and date-stamped a third time and placed into storage. But the $21.45 money order that was allegedly used to pay for Mannlicher Carcano C2766 did not have a single bank endorsement or date stamp by any bank or by any postal money order center. If Oswald had bought the rifle and paid with the money order, why was it never cashed? Oswald didn't drive, so how did he get his rifle from home to work? He rode to work with a coworker, and if he'd gotten into the car carrying a rifle or anything that looked like a rifle, don't you think the driver would have said, what you got in the bag? To which Oswald would have said, well, I got my rifle. I'm going to go shoot the president. Not the kind of thing you say even jokingly back in the 60s. Now about that rifle. The experts from the U.S. Army and the FBI who tested the rifle, the one found on the 6th floor of the schoolbook depository, discovered that it was actually not usable in the state that they found it. They had to put shims in under the telescopic sights before the rifle could be aimed. Even after the telescopic sights had been repaired, it proved unreliable and inaccurate. The condition of both the bolt and the trigger pull meant the rifle could not be aimed accurately. Witnesses all agreed the shots were not evenly spaced out, but two of them were nearly back to back, which meant Oswald would have had to have gotten off 2 shots in about a second. So Oswald, who wasn't that good of a rifleman, had to fire 3 shots in just 6 seconds, 2 of them nearly at the same time. Dallas Police Chief Jesse Curry was riding in the lead car November 22, 1963. When the shots rang out, he grabbed his radio and told his men to check the area that would later become known as the Grassy Knoll. That's where Curry thought the fatal shot had come from. Remember this, back and to the left. If you saw the movie JFK, you'll know what I'm talking about. Lee Harvey Oswald is supposed to have shot the president, then hid the rifle behind some boxes. He then ran down the stairs to the 2nd floor lunchroom, where he was questioned by Officer Marion Baker. There were 2 women who told authorities they were in the stairway and did not see Oswald running past them. The Warren Commission chose to not interview these 2 women. Now about Officer Tippit. Oswald was supposed to have shot Tippit to avoid arrest. Why would Tippit have stopped Oswald in the first place? The description that came in over the police radio said, a white male, about 5'8" to 5'9", and that was about half the people living in Dallas at the time. Tippit was shot 4 times with a semi-automatic pistol. The brass was scattered around his body. Oswald arrested carrying a revolver. In order for this to have happened, Oswald would have had to shot Officer Tippit, dumped out the 4 expended rounds, replaced them before leaving. Now, semi-automatic brass doesn't look anything like revolver ammo, but I guess the Warren Commission didn't want people to realize that. Tippit had been seen around Dallas with Oswald on more than one occasion. Tippit was also a well-known acquaintance of Jack Ruby. He was seen in his various nightclubs in and around Dallas on numerous occasions. He was seen drinking by himself, and he was seen in the company of Jack Ruby as well. So why was Officer Tippit killed? It is said Tippit was sent to kill Oswald to keep him from being questioned by the police. The witnesses said Tippit was seen with two men just before he was killed. The only witness to testify before the Warren Commission, however, was the only witness that the other witnesses said didn't arrive on the scene until well after the incident had taken place. Jack Ruby's apartment was just a few blocks farther down the street, in the direction that Oswald was supposed to have been walking when Officer Tippit was shot. We'll take a brief pause here, a few commercials, station identification, and we'll be right back after this. You're listening to Arcanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Looking for a great cup of coffee? Swing on by the Organic Man Coffee Shop, 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7. Life is too short to drink bad coffee. Not a coffee drinker? They also have hot tea, hot chocolate. Sometimes they even have sweet rolls. So swing on by Organic Man Coffee Shop, 1002 Iturbide, Suite number 7.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arcanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arcanasa Radio.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. Since Oswald didn't appear to have killed Kennedy, he really had no motivation for killing Tippit, unless he realized that Officer Tippit was there to kill him. Officer Tippit was known as Ruby's good friend. Perhaps he had figured out that Tippit was going to take him out and simply got the drop on the man, or perhaps he wasn't even there since the weapon used didn't match the gun that he had when he was arrested. When Oswald is entering the police station, he says, "I did not shoot that man. I am a patsy." He was referring to Officer Tippit at the time. He had not been charged with Kennedy's assassination or shooting Governor Connally. It appeared as if Oswald didn't even know that that's what he was being lined up for. According to the official interpretation of the assassination, Oswald's motivation for committing the crime was his desire to become famous. In the words of Senator Richard Russell, one of the Warren Commissioners, he was a general misanthropic fellow. He had a desire to get his name in the history books. In front of a bunch of reporters, Oswald said, "I did not shoot John Kennedy. I didn't even know Governor John Connally had been shot. I don't own a rifle. I didn't tell Belle Wesley Frazier anything about bringing back some curtain rods. I did carry a package into the Texas School Book Depository. I carried my lunch, a sandwich and some fruit. I had nothing personal against John Kennedy. Now remember, Bobby Kennedy was the only reason Oswald was able to get back in the country in the first place. So if anything else, he should have had good feelings towards the president and not wished to have him killed. If Oswald wanted to get into the history books, why is he denying shooting the president? Now, a big question that comes up a lot: how tall was Lee Harvey Oswald? I've asked several people this question, and most people will say he was about 5'7". According to his passport, he was 5'11", same height as I am. Now, to go from 5'7" to 5'11", he had to have grown considerably. There's also a photograph of Oswald standing next to his wife. He's only a few inches taller than her in the photograph, and she was only 5'3". So was he 5'7", or was he 5'11"? Well, Lee Harvey Oswald's Marine Corps enlistment papers record his vital statistics as being 5'8". This makes him 3 inches taller than 3 inches shorter than his passport was saying he was. It has been speculated that there may have been more than one Lee Harvey Oswald. One of them may have killed the president, and the other one may have taken the blame for it. Now, how about that mystery wallet? In a video, Captain Westbrook retrieves a wallet at the scene of the shooting. He is videotaped examining the wallet's contents by a WFAA TV camera crew. Inside the wallet is Oswald's identification and the identification of the aliases that Oswald's supposed to have used. Alec J. Heidel, according to the FBI agent Robert Barrett. Now, the wallet is not mentioned in the police report, but it is recorded in the FBI records. When Oswald was arrested, he was carrying his wallet at the time. In it was his identification. So, could he have had two wallets? And if so, why leave one at the scene of the crime? Or could it have been left there by someone trying to point the finger at Oswald? Now, Oswald was arrested at the Texas Theater. A male had called the police saying someone had just snuck into the theater without paying. But Oswald had stopped at the ticket counter and bought a ticket to get in from the girl working at the entrance. There were no male employees around at the time of Oswald's arrest. When did sneaking into a theater attract half the police in town? At that time is when they discovered that Lee Harvey Oswald was carrying a revolver on him. Why go to a theater in the middle of the afternoon on the same day when the President of the United States had just been murdered? It was a well-known CIA tactic at that time that if you needed to get information or they needed to tell you something or you needed to pass something on to them, the best place to meet would have been a movie theater. People coming and going at all hours. You walk in, it's dark, you can sit down next to just about anyone, and nobody's really supposed to be paying attention to what's going on around them. Perhaps Oswald, realizing that something bad was going down, had received orders from his handler to report to the theater where they would tell him what to do next. Now, the nitrate tests conducted by the FBI came up negative for any nitrates on Oswald's face. You cannot fire a rifle without getting burnt powder on the side of your face. If Oswald had fired the rifle found on the 6th floor, he would have had burnt powder on his right cheek. You cannot fire a rifle without getting gunpowder on you. He did have trace powder on his hands as if he had handled a weapon, but they didn't find any nitrates on his face. There is really no evidence connecting Lee Harvey Oswald to the killing of Kennedy. There were no fingerprints, no nitrates, and no witnesses. Someone had reported that they saw him while standing down in Dealey Plaza. They told the police that they looked up to the 6th floor of the building and they saw Oswald standing at the window. I've been to Dealey Plaza, and if you look up at the 6th floor, you'll be very hard-pressed to identify anybody standing at that window. But people have some unusual memories of times like that. And how did they determine the suspect's height at such an angle, looking up from the street? Well, that's anybody's guess. The photograph of Oswald holding the rifle in his backyard, that has come into question as well. Marina had said that at one time she took the photograph, but later rescinded her statement. She said she'd been threatened with deportation if she didn't tell the authorities what they wanted to hear. Oswald said he didn't own a rifle, and he was never photographed holding the rifle in the backyard of the house. Now, Ruby was supposed to have shot Oswald because of a deep love for the president and his family. He said he didn't want Jackie Kennedy to have to go through an ordeal of a trial. He claimed that this was his motive for killing Oswald. However, at the time of the motorcade, Ruby was not anywhere near the motorcade route. If he had such a strong feeling for the president and his wife, why wasn't he standing on a street corner watching them go by? Instead, he was in a newspaper office making out a advertisement for his Carousel Club. He didn't have very strong feelings for the president at that time. It was only after the murder had taken place that he suddenly developed these strong feelings. Also, the Warren Commission believers point out the fact that it was a mere coincidence that Jack Ruby was in the basement at the time that the shooting took place, when Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald. He just happened to be there. However, they failed to understand that Ruby was in the Dallas police station on and off that entire weekend. Even admitted that he wanted to shoot Oswald earlier, but he was afraid that he'd hit one of the police officers instead. If you look at photographs of the press interviews being conducted in the police station immediately after President Kennedy's death, you can pick out Ruby in several of the photographs. Does it make more sense to think that perhaps Ruby was sent to silence Oswald after Officer Tippit failed to do so? Maybe he was given the option. You kill him, or we'll kill you. Which would you rather? Spend a few years in prison and get out possibly as the hero that killed the president's murderer, or we kill you? Quite a choice. The pistol Ruby used to kill Oswald is supposed to have been one of 3 bought to send to Cuba for an attempt on Castro's life. Jack Ruby was a gun runner for the CIA, as well as a bagman for the Mafia. Then we come to the issue of Thomas Arthur Valle, Gilberto Lopez, and Lee Harvey Oswald. Valle and Oswald were both former Marines. Gilberto Lopez was connected to naval intelligence. Oswald and Valle had served at Marine bases in Japan that hosted the U-2 spy plane. Oswald at Atsugi and Valle at Camp Atsu. Both had been involved in anti-Castro Cubans, Oswald in New Orleans, Valle at the training camp in Levittown on Long Island in New York. Now, Oswald and Lopez were both members of pro-Castro organizations. Gilberto Lopez, a Cuban affiliated with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, who was trying to get back into Cuba and eventually did so via the same route that Oswald allegedly tried to take via Texas and Mexico City. Like Oswald, Lopez had recently separated from his wife and had been in fistfights in the summer of 1963 over supposed pro-Castro sympathies. Oswald and Valle had recently started working at buildings that overlooked the route of the presidential motorcade. Oswald at the Texas School Book Depository on Elm Street in Dallas, and Valet at the IPP lithoplate, 625 West Jackson Boulevard in Chicago. Like Oswald, Lopez was also of interest to naval intelligence. Also similar to Oswald, Gilberto Lopez made a mysterious trip to Mexico City in the fall of 1963, where he was attempting to get into Cuba. And the government reports say that both men went one way by car, though neither man owned a car, and neither man was able to drive. Declassified Warren Commission and CIA documents confirm that Lopez, whose movements paralleled Oswald in so many ways in 1963, was on a secret mission for the U.S. involving Cuba. An operation so secret that the CIA felt that protecting it was considered more important than thoroughly investigating the JFK assassination. The non-investigation. Now, at the time of the JFK's murder from Parkland Hospital, nearly at gunpoint by the Secret Service agents. Did they feel that those hicks in Dallas couldn't do a proper job of investigating the murder? Or is there something else they're trying to cover up? Dallas PD, when they initially started the investigation, found the wrong rifle. It was identified as a Mauser by two seasoned Dallas police officers. One of them, Roger Craig, was Policeman of the Year in Dallas. Despite threats and harassment, he insisted the rifle he found was a Mauser. He knew firearms and could not have made such a mistake. There were only 2 spent shells found at the scene. Both were logged into evidence. Both had the initials of the investigating officer on them. When Teague came forward with a bullet wound, and the conspirators had to come up with a 3rd shell case. If you look at the log sheet, you can see how the 2 may have been redone to make it look like a 3. Later, Officer Craig is supposed to have killed himself, as in found dead under unusual circumstances. The shells found lined up on the windowsill still didn't fit the Mauser, but were from the Mannlicher Carcano. None of these shells had the investigating officer's initials on them. We're going to take a brief pause here, play some commercials, it's station identification. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to Arcanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Dying for a great cup of coffee? Can't find one anywhere in Laredo? Swing on by the Organic Man Coffee Shop, 1002 Iturbide, suite number 7. Not a coffee drinker? They also have hot tea, hot chocolate. They have some sweet rolls on occasion and muffins. Also a great place to meet with your friends if you're looking for a You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed those brief commercials. Now, the Warren Commission. It was a group of politicians pretending to be a homicide investigation. They weren't so much interested in finding out who killed the president as they were trying to prevent World War III, or at least that was the motivation for some. Chief Justice Warren wanted nothing to do with the commission. He only went along because he was told if Russia was involved and it got out, it would lead to World War III and all of humanity would perish. Alan Dulles, who actually ran the investigation, well, remember, he was the guy that got fired by lower part of his neck, exited through his throat because there's a scene in the Zapruder film of Kennedy holding his throat. The bullet exited Kennedy's throat, hits Governor Connally in the back, exits Connally's chest, hits him in the wrist, exits his wrist, and then hit him in the leg. One bullet makes 7 wounds, I believe it was. Then, while Connally is laying on a stretcher at Parkland Hospital, the bullet fell out all by itself. At the time of the magic bullet, apparently they didn't bother to read the autopsy from the hospital that said that they found a bullet in Kennedy's back. It had only penetrated about 3 inches. The Warren Commission just simply chose to ignore that little piece of information. Now, according to a report by CIA Chief Historian David Robarg, released to the public in 2014, the CIA Director McCone, who was in charge in '63, was complicit in a Central Intelligence Agency benign cover-up by withholding information from the Warren Commission. According to the CIA report, CIA officers had been instructed to give only passive killing President Kennedy. The CIA also covered up evidence that the CIA may have been in communications with Oswald before 1963, according to their own findings. In other words, the CIA was investigating the CIA, and they discovered that they had done wrong. Nothing was done about it. Why would why would Oswald kill the older brother of the man who got him back into the U.S.? Marina has come out recently and said she never really believed Oswald had shot Kennedy. Oswald, she said, actually admired the president. No matter what you think, you can't ignore the final shot from the Zapruder film. Kennedy's head goes back and to the left. His skull winds up on the trunk of the car. When Jackie Kennedy is seen climbing out on the trunk of the vehicle, she's not there to help the Secret Service agent climb up into the back of the sedan. What she's actually doing is she's trying to get the skull back. She thought they could put it back in and keep her husband going. She really thought he needed that piece of skull plate. Now, since when does an entrance wound throw a huge chunk of the skull to the back of the vehicle? If you find the idea of Oswald being the lone assassin just about as believable as most of what comes out of Washington these days, check out some of the following books. I highly recommend any one of them. First book is called Crossfire by Jim Marrs. The movie JFK, one with Kevin Costner, is based on that book. Well worth reading, but you're not going to get through it in a weekend. It's rather thick and rather informative. Very good book, though, to read. Then there's Dr. Mary's Monkey by Edward Haslam. This is Dr. Mary Sherman, who was working on a secret laboratory where they were trying to weaponize the cancer virus. Dr. Mary was killed in a very bizarre lab accident where she was hit with a massive jolt of electricity that almost cut her body in half. Now, the people working in the lab, instead of calling the police and saying, hey, we just had this really bizarre accident and one of our people here, by the time she arrived back at her own apartment, she had finally passed away. Why they didn't take her to the hospital? Well, she was working in a secret lab after all. So Dr. Mary's Monkey by Edward Haslam, that'll keep you awake at night. Another good book to read is Me and Lee by Judith Very Baker. She was a lab assistant working at the same lab where Dr. Mary was murdered. Then there's On the Trail of the Assassins by Jim Garrison. Fantastic book to read. Once again, it will probably keep you awake at night. Not the kind of thing you can just flip through a few pages and then put it down. It will grab your attention. Next set of books I would recommend are called Impossible, The Case Against Lee Harvey Oswald by Barry Krushk. It's a trilogy, but if you buy 2 of the books, you get the 3rd one for free. Very informative, but there is a lot of evidence, a lot of detailed analysis of the situation. It'll definitely Mr. Lane said, okay, take me to court, sue me. And the CIA didn't. They just they didn't want to talk to him anymore. Why they didn't want to go to court is anybody's guess. Anyway, if you're into the JFK conspiracy, I recommend any one of those books. Highly informative. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. Next week, we will be talking about my favorite subject, coffee. What can possibly be strange about coffee? Well, tune in and find out. You might be amazed. Thank you for listening. This has been Strange Things with Chris James. You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say murder 3? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.